it's very important that the content and the context, they go together. Because if we are building the curriculum, it's good to have some global perspectives, but we are training leaders who are going to be global leaders, but they are also very important for the region and for the local areas. So I have a set of 4 colleagues. I will introduce them one at a time as we go through our session. I have one request. Do ask questions. I have asked each speaker to make their remarks, and if you have a question while they are making the remarks, please ask, because sometimes we tend to lose the chain of thoughts. Is that okay with each speaker? Because I want this to be a very interactive session where it has to be a learning experience for both you all and us. So don't think that this is just one speech end and the second speech starts. But if there are some important questions, do raise there, and I can decide whether we bring it at the end or answer at this point. Amit just mentioned this is, I don't know why I do this, but this is my 3rd job as a dean, and there are only 3 people in the US history who have done dean's job 3 times. Right? So the only difference is the other 2 have done 3 jobs within US. I did in US, then I have colleagues here from INSEAD. I did it for Europe, and now I'm in Asia. Right? What I want to do is first share with you few perspectives that I have learned over the years. I had the chance of working with a great mentor, Dean Don Jacobs. Steve Dickray is going to speak tomorrow. We both have been blessed by his wisdom over the years. Steve used to be at Kellogg, then left for Miami, from Hong Kong, and now in Manila. So we have people from Kellogg who have seen the world. And over this last 35 years, I started my job on September 9th, 1979 as a professor. So 35 years of management education. How I have seen this field, how this field has evolved, and what are some of the things that we all need to think about, particularly in the Asian context. Being an Asian, I would say that, except that I was much better off when I was at Kellogg. Then I came to INSEAD, nothing wrong with INSEAD, but in 2012, month of February, I was diagnosed with brain tumor with cancer. So luckily recovered from that, but last August after joining Thailand, I started having problems with my hip, which is a side effect of 9 months of steroids. So I told the surgeon that earlier I had trouble with my head office, now I seem to have trouble with my back office. So I don't know what's next going to be, but so please excuse me if I have to limp or anything, but I will try my best. Dr. Singh this morning, when he was speaking and making his remarks, went all the way to 1910. If you remember in his remarks at the beginning of this century, when I was sick, I always believed that if you have to think big. So I started thinking about a bigger framework of the last 500 years and see how businesses have evolved and where we are today and where we are going to see next. So if you look at up to the 19th century, I would describe the business model as a model of colonialism. The players were countries. We Indians were ruled by the British for 200 years. And that's, you see that model today also, except in today we use the word called outsourcing. Right? Some country have resources that you make the best use of it, but the property remains with the country. In those days, players like UK, Spain, France, they saw countries that were rich in resources, and what they provided was management with full ownership. That was the difference. And the metric that we used was power, and in some sense, The power was how many countries were under your belt. And I remember in 1962 when I first started going to kindergarten school in India, it was what you call a convent school, still run by some British, and they made it very clear to us that the sun never sets on the British Empire. There was a time. But then a country emerged, 1776. US comes to the marketplace and we see a new model of, from colonialism, we move to the world of capitalism. Pankaj in his remarks, if you remember, showed many different models of capitalism across the countries in Asia, and it was very in-depth analysis. But now the players were no longer countries but corporations. I am a board of director of John Deere and Company, and 2 years ago we celebrated 175 years of that company. The oldest US corporation seems to be DuPont, and you would see histories of the last 200 such years that these companies or corporations have followed the model of capitalism, but at the same time create enough economic value for all parties concerned. Here the metrics move to profits, or for listed companies you can say the shareholder value or the stock price and others. And now the impact was how successful a company has been. This is what we have seen, and just I want to share a small story. When I became the Dean of Kellogg, one of my aspirations was to meet the father of capitalism. You all know whom I'm talking about. Do you get a sense? The one who Milton Friedman, who spent his life at Chicago. So one of my alums said, Dean Jain, this is the minimum I can do for you. So we flew to San Francisco. He lived in the Palo Alto area. And at that time he was 91 years old, but sharp as a razor. And we had set up, I flew from Chicago, landed there at 10:30. The lunch was at 11:30. He and his wife, Rose, they both came. And we had set up the lunch at the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. So 4 of us go there, me, my friend, and they too. And the club denied entry. They say women not allowed. Now, of all the places in the world, the last place in San Francisco, I would have thought of this, but this is 2003, July 2nd, 2003. They say women not allowed, and that also Rose Friedman. It was very embarrassing for me. I didn't check. This is the last thing I would check, that whether they would be there. Anyway, then I told Dr. Friedman that you must be eating out somewhere. You just take us to a place where you go, because for us it's more the intellectual food that we want to share rather than the actual lunch. So he took us to a restaurant. As soon as we reached there, the owner says, Dr. Friedman, good to have you here. Today we have this special fish that you like. Would you like us to prepare the same dish for your colleagues? Now I'm a vegetarian. I said that if you have some vegetables or fruits, that would be fine. But we sat down and we spent about 2 hours, and we started talking about capitalism, and I wanted to see his thought process. And you know, I had read a remark of his that prompted me to go and see him, and the remark was what he said, that if you let the Sahara Desert run by the government, in 10 years there would be shortage of sand. Right, that's what he said. That if you let the Sahara Desert run by the government, in 10 years there would be shortage of sand. Now his point was that if you have to make the best utilization of resources, private hands would do it because they have better incentives for them and the people they work for. So we spent all this time. 2 hours later, we came out. Then he sits in his car, but he tells me like this. He says, Dr. Jain, I have heard a lot about you. You know, he's a man, very short. He said, I have heard a lot about you, but let me tell you one thing. Kellogg is no Chicago. Right? He just wanted to make clear that Kellogg School is no Chicago. That man at 91 had the same passion. And not that you want to argue with him, because we were just rated #1 in Business Week at the time. So he must have read that, but he wanted to make it clear. Where we are today and why this conference. I think today we are in the age of human capital development. If you talk to any CEO of the company, they think products can be copied. The only sustainable advantage they have is the quality of human capital. They have both the attraction, development, and retention. And the second point I want to make is today is the day of entrepreneurialism. You look at Facebook, a person creates. You look at Uber, all these companies. Even if you go back 35, 40 years ago and look at whether it is Steve Jobs or you look at Bill Gates, one person created a corporation in a very short period. Today, what is the market cap of Apple? 600, 700 billion dollars. I see in my children, for them to be loyal to a company for 32 years, 35 years, I'm not sure whether they would, because we need to harness their power, and hence a concept that I teach is reverse mentoring, that today when you hire a new MBA, it is very important for you to learn from that person and see what the new thoughts or perspectives that person is bringing. You may be there for 20 years in the company, but it is important to learn something from them. And the players are no longer the corporations, it's what I call the citizens, and we would see more and more of such activity. That's why in the curriculum, I'm sure all of you have great emphasis of entrepreneurship, innovation, and business plan competition, where rather than just teaching the core subjects in the classroom, it's good to get them involved or engaged in different projects. And I think that the metric also is no longer just profits. There is a purpose. In 98-99 period, we invited Bill Gates to come and talk to our students at Kellogg. And he at that time said that, at that time I was the Deputy Dean under Dean Jacobs, that his time has come to move from profits to purpose, or what I described, the journey from success to significance. So that was the brand of Kellogg. When I became the dean, by joining Kellogg School, you are starting your journey from success to significance. So for MBA students, it's first important that you be successful, because without success, you don't build an identity. Today we talked about Bill Gates because he created something. But at some point, time has come for us to also give back. So this morning when there was a question raised about academic rigor, then we talked about business relevance. To me, the third leg is also equally important. You need to have academic excellence, business relevance, but with social significance. Any curriculum you do, it is important that we emphasize, because the younger generation is very much interested in that. So some aspects of social significance should be there in the curriculum. Now, what are the mission of management schools? First is knowledge creation. This morning discussion about why the US schools are US schools, and we look at Asian schools. We have not spent time building the content. And to me, that is knowledge creation. Knowledge creation does not mean another paper in Strategic Management Journal or so. Creating knowledge that other schools in the world would then use if they have to teach a course at Harvard doing business in the ASEAN context. They need some material. And we would be the right people to produce such context, such content. And hence, I think the first part of our schools here should think of writing interesting case studies, other projects that would be of use to people outside Asia. The second, of course, is knowledge dissemination. If you build a very good course here, I can rest assure you, many schools in the West would invite you to come and teach that course there. That's how the knowledge dissemination starts. And that is where we convert the research into classroom pedagogical tools. And then the third part, of course, is the knowledge certification. We universities have a privilege to award a degree. Many consulting firms can also create knowledge, disseminate knowledge, but any consulting firms or others, they don't have the authority to award an MBA, an MSc or a PhD degree.
Sir,
absolutely. Okay, of course.
Yes, there is a missing link between creation and dissemination. I think we should add one more, that's the translation. For example, this is the pure knowledge.
Yes.
And then before you can use that, you have to translate that in a common language. And after that, you disseminate. And then after that, you can use it.
I would just say that translation of that part is actually a part of the dissemination. Because we professors, when we hire a new professor at Kellogg and he did a PhD in suppose in the area of channels of distribution. So he did his whole thesis and now we are creating a course on marketing channels. That person would translate that rigor into relevance in the dissemination. And what we did was, in some universities, when you write papers, this was one initiative I started at Kellogg, I asked each professor that I would give you a research assistant who will come and interview your paper and translate those papers from Greek to plain English. Because all these finance papers are with alpha, beta and all those Greeks, and translate into plain English. And in our Kellogg world, we used to publish that in 2 to 3 pages, just the gist of those articles that were published in Journal of Finance or Journal of Econometrica and others. Okay, that's what. But where we are moving, to just add to your point, the next step for us to survive, the step is knowledge monetization. And this is where the link to the business world would come. A lot of businesses have very good projects. They are willing to give us some money because we cannot just rely on alumni giving or donations. So our students getting into projects with companies, and those projects for companies, just allow me to mention names, would be done at a cheaper cost than the McKinseys or the BCGs on the booze of the world. In fact, the work would be done by the same people who would just go and work for those companies except with no overheads. All right? This is there. And this is the best way to link the schools with corporations. First, some of these students end up getting jobs there, and they pay us a small lump sum amount, and we use that amount to fund some research chairs of professor. I had this craft research professorship for which I used to get $5,000 annually for my research. But Kraft used to pay Kellogg $50,000 every year. So these kind of ways where this knowledge gets into monetization to help promote both the creation and the dissemination. And the social mission would be just promoting the performance with the purpose. You have to have a purpose why we are doing this. And this is where I would end. Then the speakers would build on it. Now think about how management education has evolved. I showed you how businesses have evolved. And Jitendra made a point about Harvard Business School. Why I corrected him 1908. Because we all business schools have to go through this AACSB accreditation. And I was the chair to review the Harvard Business School. So at least there is one date I know clearly was they started in 1908. And the year I was the chair was 2,800 years after that. And if you look at 1908, 2 business schools started at that time. The Northwestern Business School and the Harvard Business School. Harvard Business School started in 1908 April, and we started in 1908 October in the downtown campus in Chicago downtown. But the oldest business school happens to be Dartmouth, then Wharton, and then these schools. So most of you would see, we have a history of about 100 to 110 to 15 years. If you see how these schools started, up to the 60s, the primary pedagogical tool used to be case studies, started by the Harvard Business School. And the classroom discussion was done. Professors used to engage people in discussion. And I said the decision-making inputs was primarily judgment and intuition. And the focus was business relevance. And in many schools, these were part-time programs also. And Then came this period when I joined business schools from the late 60s to the 90s. Business schools started recruiting people from basic disciplines. My PhD is in applied mathematics, and one of my students whom I was tutoring told me, Professor, you can get better return on your intellect if you move to business rather than teach mathematics for the rest of the life. At least I learned something from my student. And point I want to make is this era from 70s, 80s, 90s till today, people from economics, psychology, anthropology, mathematics, statistics, they came and they started building a lot of theories. Or what I describe is how you put structure on unstructured problems. Because what is the business education? How you think of a structured framework. We use this word, and a lot of analytical models came. OB faculty members, strategy faculty members, the BCG matrix and others, Michael Porter's, Pankaj Ghemawat, lot of researchers brought different paradigms, and now we started shifting both from relevance to rigor. And now if you see today, what happened after the 2000 years was every business school started adding in the curriculum this concept of experiential global learning. We used to call GIM, Global Initiatives in Management. Students go to other countries, do projects, and that became a very important part of the curriculum. And that was one way for US schools to make the curriculum relevant, was to send their people to India, China, to the Asian countries, to European countries. And that was a very big shift, I would say, beginning of this century. The other part was 2001, the Enron case. That brought this whole concept of business ethics into the curriculum, sustainability, CSR, all these topics are topics in the last 10 to 15 years, where they became integral part of the curriculum to make it relevant to the needs of the society. It's not that you teach a new course on ethics, but we need to address the ethics issue when you are trying to come up with a solution in the case. Is that the best decision even from an ethics point of view? And so I say that you had rigor, relevance and significance, and the results all combined. So we heard from morning that we are in an era of transformation where Pankaj talked about globalization, huge competition among business schools. There is uncertainty. If you ask me, looking at what's happening in the world today, the economic as well as the political uncertainty, integration of business, government and society, and also a public scrutiny. Nothing is hidden today. Everything would be out. And one thing I learned from Dean Jacobs when I became the dean, he said, Dipak, never do anything in life as if it's going to be a secret. As a dean, don't try to hide things or anything, because if it gets out, it would be a reflection on your character rather than things. We are under a state of public scrutiny. So any curriculum perspective that you develop, it has to have those things. So my last thing is, we all believe that for business schools, our currency is our reputation. Now some schools have a different currency, the endowment, but in Asia, we are not blessed with that particular feature. So it would be our reputation. Second is program differentiation. Having the same classes that is there at other schools, then what's the difference? People would say that we will go there. And this differentiation, what Amit was saying in the beginning in his remarks, is each of my speakers, I would like them to emphasize on these 4 points. Disruptive pedagogical tools. Can something be taught which is very Asian? An Asian way of doing things, a pedagogical thing, or evolving mission and scope. So with that, I feel that challenges come in our way to make us better, not bitter. And we are right now in a state which is our time. By our time, I mean time of all us Asians or people associated with Asian business schools to make a contribution to management education.